I am a nerd. Yes, thank you. So as you can see, there will be a couple creepy mods showing around. Thank you. There will be some mods running around because sometimes you get some spams and robots and whatever. So they'll be lurking. Ignore them. They're fine. But yeah. So they'll be lurking. Just ignore them. They're fine. It's nerd power indeed. So, I got this all set up and ready to go. Let me know if there's any issues, because sometimes issues come up, and that's just the way that a stream goes. Anyway, this is our lovely summoner. Ta-da! So I've done this one before. It was a couple years back now, for a different writing server. My rivaling is perfect so far. Excellent! Yay! Look, that's all I can ask for. Hello. We're gonna try and keep this as child-friendly as possible, so avoid curse wording, but, like, at the same time, if cursing happens, cursing happens. I do not care. It is fine. We just want to keep this as friendly for YouTube as possible. And make Ko's job the least amount of struggle as possible. You've actually been writing more recently? Excellent. I'm glad. Don't do what I did. Look, if swearing comes up, I'm probably gonna swear. It'll be fine. But as long as we keep it, so we're past like that 30-second mark, so we can curse as all we want. And as you can see, the chat won't show up on the screen. If anybody does any follows, it also won't show up on screen anymore right now, because I have that just off for this particular section. I don't really know. Scene, I guess. I guess it'd be a scene for Streamlabs anyway. But yeah, so nothing's gonna get in the way, nothing's gonna show up. You shouldn't have any ads. If there's an ad, let me know. I'm gonna go scream at Twitch because I turned them all off. Okay? I think we're good. Alrighty. So I'm gonna start off by saying there will be a whole section for questions at the end, and I believe I have like a little mini game that we can play, but we'll see how that goes with between everybody doing their own thing, because a lot of people just like to listen and do something else, and they don't necessarily want to pretend that they're chit-chatting. Anyway, so welcome to Fight Scenes, where things go bang, boom, and bleh. Need it on here. On Streamlabs. There we go. Okay, so this is just a friendly reminder. I will give you guys a couple seconds, or not a couple seconds, like a minute or so to do bathroom, snacks, drinks, note taking, anything like that. If we're all ready to go, I'll just go ahead. But, yeah. If you guys, I don't know how long this is gonna be. Pardon my squeaky chair. The last time I did it, it was like 2 hours. I'm hoping it's not gonna be 2 hours this time. I have eaten and I've gotten water. I have a drink. I have my tea. It's going. I'm a little shaky, but it's not from that. It's from talking to you guys because I get slightly stage fright, even though I stream all the time. I also can pee in a minute. I can. I have had to rush to the bathroom and then come back in the same amount of time. What is that tea mug? It is a pink, purple. I guess it's like a lavender mug. Yeah, it's a lavender mug. It's got some black tea in it, some mullein, some nettle, some raspberry, some chamomile. It's got a bunch of crap in it. It's for my migraines, so the sound tickles your brain. I'm glad. Okay. I'll give it until about 12:06-ish, and then we'll get started. So we can keep people's not missing some things. Not that they're probably going to miss anything, but, you know, it's there. Also, I spammed the living hell out of the Discord, which is fun. Okay. Also, if you're wondering, because I'm just going to fill the air here, my coaster is a book. It's a book coaster. And it comes in like this little container that shows like books on like a bookshelf. So, yeah. I have that. It's neat. I'll put it in the Discord on the writing server once the thingy is done. That way I'm not wasting time. How dare you have one and I don't? Actually, you know what? I'll do it right now since we're waiting. Boop. Take a little picture. See the laptop in the background, my messy desk. It's quite wonderful. Boop. Alright. Let's go put it on that writing server. For shame, book is for stabilizing tables and not posters. Ah! There's a little drawer that came out. Anyway, I forgot that drawer was there. Beep, beep, beep. It's gonna go in off topic because it is an off topic subject. Boop. Okay. I think we're good to go. We are a minute past, so if you guys aren't here, you guys aren't here. Alrighty, so introduction. We're gonna be talking about fight scenes. If you're here for that, great. If you're not, well, I don't know what to tell you. What we cover? You're covering a lot of stuff. So we're gonna talk about the why fight scenes happen, who's fighting, character advantages and disadvantages, weapons, boons, and banes. So we're gonna go pretty, not heavily into the weapons section, but like relatively, because there's a lot of misconceptions with the rule of cool, and I always love the rule of cool, but can't always have the rule of cool. Advantages and disadvantages in general. I think that's supposed to be armor, weapons, and you know what? It doesn't matter. We'll figure it out when we get there. Playing field, objects in a field, environment changes, armies and strategies, some modern warfare stuff, not Call of Duty, you know what I mean. Some tactics, purpose, emotional impact, immersion, atmosphere, exposition. I can talk, I swear. Before a fight, during a fight, linear progression, cohesion, structure, sentence composition, do's and don'ts, how to best write it, and that will be a, that last part's going to be more of like a personal preference. Everybody has their own different preferences. You can do as you please, whatever's most comfortable for you, so I'm just going to get that off the bat. So, yeah. Anyway, so why? Why do we have fight scenes? A lot of fight scenes are done through conflict. Also, if you have any questions, I will be looking at the chat. So if any questions come up, I will answer them as they come up, though I do have a section at the end for major questions. So if you have any major questions, write them down, save it till the end, please. Alrighty, so, back to this. Conflict. Character plots, narrative plots, and political plots. I'm just going to stop right there for a moment. So fight scenes can bring up a lot of character issues, like if they're good in fights or they're bad in fights, if they have like insomnia and you want to go like that route of them being an assassin of like proportions unbelievable and it's just knowing what's going on, so that could be a way of figuring out that character plot. It could also be a driven for a narrative plot where you kind of want to get the motion happening of like, if a fight shows up because there's a monster, why is the monster there? That creates a narrative point of view. Political plots, you can think about like assassination of the king, for example, Caesar being stabbed 37 times in the chest, like those kinds of things. So a political fight, either like in a court or literally just removing a political figure, can also bring up a lot of different conflicts and cause a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Tension and stress and instability, which is kind of what you want in a plot, is that instability. Jesus is one of my favorite plays. I've never actually read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar stuff, but I know a lot of people do enjoy it. And we'll have also verbal fights versus physical fights. So that's it is what it is. So you have people either arguing, and you have different types of arguments, stuff like that. We're going to be mostly focusing on the physical aspect versus the verbal fights. But I can go into it a little bit here, where it's about, like, you want to... So in verbal fights, it's a lot of shouting back and forth, typically. Though if you have two relatively calm, normal, emotionally matured people, the verbal fights could be more calmer, more wittier, that sort of thing. Confused Mikey's confuzzled. She is. She's always confuzzled. So, like, verbal fights are not going to have the same amount as physical fights, but they'll have the same speed in which they need to be delivered. Because when you're in a heated argument with, say, customer service, Karen is going to go off on you, and you're either just going to nod your head as it keeps going, or it's going to be like, okay, this back and forth thing, because your mind is rolling and running and it's on adrenaline. So it's going to be the same thing in that aspect as physical fights, except physical fights are going to be less talking and more punchy. Alright, so who is fighting? You have 1v1, you have multiple, so there's more than two, and you have armies. We'll talk about armies a little bit later, because it's a completely different subject. But for 1v1, you're going to have the focus on just two people, which is a lot easier to write than it would be for, say, one person versus three in the middle of a ship, and they're having to fight three of them at the same time. And there's a lot more going on when you have multiples of people's working over just 1v1. And then, as I said, we're going to talk about armies a little bit later, but with armies, you're dealing with hundreds and thousands of people, and being aware of how you're going to write that is going to be a lot more different in terms of exposition and position, and, like, knowing where the character is and making sure the reader knows where everything is going to be a lot different than, say, the multiples on the 1v1. As you can tell, I have a bunch of my art in here. You can fight me. I will fight back. So characters' advantages and disadvantages. Oh boy. So we have, like, race. Not your typical, like, human ones, but I'm talking about, like, aliens and other sort of people that are going to be different from one another. They'll have advantages and disadvantages. Think of, like, elves versus, like, a goblin. The elves are a little taller than a goblin. The goblin's probably a little more sneaky. The elf race has, like, technology that the goblins don't. I'm glad you like the air. Yay! So what are the advantages and disadvantages of these characters? And those will play severe roles in how they will equip themselves, deal with conflicts, engage with them, or avoid them entirely. And just in general, words. They'll fight differently from other people, basically. So we've got three different people here. We've got Ava, which is a little winged girl. She has wings. She's gonna have a completely, like, mass amount of room to fight due to having that y-axis on top of just having the single playing field of being on the ground. And that's a huge disadvantage to somebody, say, little arrow over there, who's on the ground. And then you have Day, of course, which is a dragon. So a dragon's going to have a massive advantage due to being her size, but it's also going to be a disadvantage if the space is small. So keep those in mind as you're doing your fight scenes. Everyone's going to have an advantage, everyone's going to have a disadvantage, and you can use those advantages against them or for them in order to create your fight scenes more interactive and more entertaining. You have some physical attributes, which I was kind of going on about there. So some people can see in the dark, some people have wings, some people can't, some people are very quick in thinking versus somebody that's not quick in thinking. So that's more of like a intellectual intelligence section, where you have like street smarts versus book smarts, for example. And so having advantages of how you know how to fight versus somebody that doesn't know how to fight will also create a character advantage and disadvantages when you're writing out this stuff. And that's the fighting intelligence I went into. So you got your strengths, you got your weaknesses. Keep them in mind as you write. Use them. Don't forget them. If you forget them, your readers are going to notice and they'll be like, I thought that they're like super squishy and they'll just blow up if you touch them. And if you don't incorporate that into your story, then that's going to be a plot hole. And you don't want a plot hole. Like Ava, for example, super strong. Absolute glass cannon. She will break very quickly. And, of course, magic. So not all stories have magic, which is normal. I'm a fantasy lore person. I do fantasy, so there's going to be magic. And so different advantages and different magics will play a role in how things turn out. So you're not going to bring a spoon to a gunfight, for example. And that spoon is not going to do great against a magic fight. And I don't think a magic fight's going to go well in a gunfight's not going to go well in a magic fight. There we go. Got it backwards. Because magic is a lot more... Depends on your world, too. But, like, magic, for the most part, is a lot more versatile than a physical world. Magic spoon. Could be. Bring a spoon. Knowing me. Yeah. But, like, the point I was going on about is, like... Magic has an entirely different playing field versus a physical medium. It's not as tangible, and so you can really play with that and have like the characters either be super sensitive to a specific magic like the enemy's using, or they'll have the advantage because the enemy is weak against that specific magic. And I mean, if you have a magic spoon, bring the magic spoon. Nobody's going to, like, let down the fact that they were absolutely destroyed by a magic spoon named Spoony, okay? Alright, so weapons, boons, and banes. This is kind of like the subject I was supposedly gonna go on about. So you'll have your weapons that are good against things, and you'll have weapons that are bad against things. Spoony. And so typically spears are considered one of the better, if not the best, melee weapons, even though they're not used a lot in media. And the reason why they're not used in media a lot is, and swords are, is because swords are stupid easy to use. It is a swish, swish, stab. That's it. You swish, and you stab. That's a sword. Anybody can use a sword. You have to train and get really good to use a spear. You can use a spear. It's pokey. But, like, there's a lot more into it than a swish, swish, stab. Which is why a lot of media turns to swords, because any idiot, like, literally anybody can use a sword. Well, not so much with a spear. And a lot of, like, even in history, too, a lot of people had swords on them, mostly arming swords, because they were easy to use. You didn't need any training, you can just pick it up and you can go. Look, my terminology is wonderful, okay? Swords were pretty used, like, they were expensive, but, like, they were used pretty often. Like, a lot of, like, mercenaries would just have a sword on them. They weren't probably the best, but that's why we find a lot of swords, like, found throughout all over the place, is because they're easy to make, they're easy to use, and you don't need to be a genius to use them. While spears were a lot more expensive to make because they were higher, like, they were for higher ranks for the, like, military and stuff like that. Like, say, you got your Greek soldiers, they had their pokies. I'm forgetting the name of them now, and I don't know why. Thank you, Rin, for that wonderful insight. And then, of course, you've got the idea of reach. Yes, you lost my train of thought. Thank you, Anthony. So, the, train of thought gone. Anyway, boons and banes of, right, spears, long range. So, spears will have a typical advantage over swords and a lot of other things because of their range. You want as much range as possible in a fight scene, or any fight in general, because it gives you the ability to not get poked back. So, like, bringing a knife to a gunfight, not great, because the gun can fire before you can get there with the knife. And so that's why spears are typically the most advantage weapon to use in terms of physical. But if you want to go fancy, like a scythe, for example, there's not a lot of ward scythes because they're really hard to use. You have to be really, really good at them in order to use them properly and have any sort of success. So that's what I was kind of talking about earlier about the cool factor versus the usefulness of what you're doing, like the practicality of it. And so practicality is really important for weapons. So if a character is not used to a specific weapon, they shouldn't be good at it as soon as they pick it up unless there's a reason for that. And that will very much come into a play with ranged weapons. So with ranged weapons, you've got guns, you've got bows, you've got crossbows, you got everything under the sun. You've got a cannon. Not everybody's going to be able to use those. You typically need to practice, you need to have some sort of aim, you need to be able to load the damn thing. That sort of, like, those kinds of aspects are incredibly important when it comes to when you're writing it. When you're writing a character either knowing what they're doing or not knowing what they're doing, and they can seriously screw up, which then can act out in the fight scene of how it's going to play out. And I have this little game here that we can play if we want to, but basically that can be applied to world building, which dictates fight scenes. Yes, it can very much apply to world building, which can dictate fight scenes. So wars are a lot of the times unfortunately fought with the best weapon and the best application of that weapon. And being able to have like an army that's sophisticated in knowing what they're doing versus a farm-filled army, you're not gonna have the same amount of effect. The people that are very sophisticated in what they're doing are gonna have the extreme advantage versus people that don't know what they're doing. Yeah, so the big downside with spears is you can get behind the tip. So their spear is that length, which is a huge boon, but it's also a bit of a bane because it's range. So unless you're able to smack somebody with it, it's not gonna super help if they already have their sword in you at that point. So yeah, as I was saying, the game. We can play a little game where we can pick a weapon and then we can decide how it's useful and how it's not useful. Or we can just skip along. Totally up to you guys. Spear without a tip is just a bow staff. Just smack them. It's fine. Smacking, it can do damage. But not if the spear is, though. If you do break the spear, it can cause a severe disadvantage. But yeah, what's a weapon that you guys kind of like have either in your stories or you find really cool, but maybe are not necessarily the best weapon you can use? Or is the best weapon they can use? These hands. Look. Maces are wonderful. They have like that heavier tip at the end of it, so when you swing, it gets that good old smash, but like you do have to have the strength to swing the smash. And hands are great up until your bones start breaking. Actually, maces are actually just wonderful in general. They have a little bit of range. They do a sneaky smack, and some maces have spikies and some maces don't. Broadswords are heavy smash but slow movement? Yeah. So broadswords, you would think are extremely heavy, but they're actually no more than 10 pounds typically. They're between, I believe, 7 and 10 pounds. So they're not as heavy as you think they are, but they are heavier than, say, just a regular sword, which is between 4 pounds and 6 pounds. Our Mista Sticks. What is that? To Google. What is a Mista Sticks? That's not what I wanted. Why did you highlight that? I want this. Copy. Zwindlers are where it's at. Yeah, I do love them Zwindlers. I don't think I'm pronouncing it right. But that's fine. They're fun. They're all spiky and stuff. And, well, I say it's spiky. They're kind of spiky, but like they got like that extra like zip shoe just ripping through armor. Oh, it's one of those things. Yeah, that's a stick. That will hurt. The Nightwing weapons. I know the Nightwing weapons. Why do you start with that? Yeah, sticks hurt. Daredevil. Alrighty. Phoenix, you better be staying over there and sleeping. I have 2 cats in here. They're sleeping. Hopefully they remain sleeping. Alrighty, so we got some advantages and disadvantages in general. So we got some armor. So armors are gonna play a big role. So each team or each character will have different armors, and they'll have different histories to go along with that armor. Some people don't have armor at all. Some people do. Some people have way too much armor, and some people have magic armor. Like this armor here, magic armor. So that will cause advantages and disadvantages either in areas where, say, magic doesn't work anymore, so the magic in that armor is going to fail and it just leaves her in a really cute skirt and top, which is not great when you're in a fight with, say, dragons. You don't want that. We talked a little bit about weapons with advantages and disadvantages. So since Ava here has a pew pew, it's going to have a massive advantage against somebody that has to get close in order to hurt you. Skills is a massive thing between advantages and disadvantages. If your characters are skilled versus not skilled characters, the not skilled characters are going to get absolutely rinsed. Ava is best girl. They're gonna get rinsed. But if your character is the one on the end of getting absolutely rinsed, it's because they're probably either not as skilled as the person that is against them, or there's something wrong with them. Like they're injured, they're having issues, their armor breaks, their weapons are gone, that sort of thing. There's also the advantage and disadvantage of magic. If there's mana involved, do you run out of mana? How fast does that mana run out? Are there weaknesses and disadvantages of using that magic versus not using the magic? That sort of thing. If you're used to using magic too, and then suddenly you don't have the magic, you're going to fumble. And it will freak you out, and it will psych you out, and so the character in that situation is not going to do as well because they're psyched out, and that's one thing with a fight, is you don't want to be psyched out, and if your character's psyched out, then they're going to start fumbling, and fumbling is bad if you want to win. For writing, though, creates a lot of tension. Also, who's with who, so that's if your friend, like if your character's with a team versus another team, they'll have a more equal playing field. If they're not with a team and they're against a team, then they're probably going to get screwed. You have to use logic when it comes to fight scenes, because there's a lot of logic in play. And so you're not going to have somebody, like, say, an adult gonna lose to, like, say, a 2-year-old who's throwing a little temper tantrum and has a little rattle. It's just not gonna happen. If, like, it came to, like, a physical fight, like, that adult is going to win. They can just chuck them out the window. Game over. Game over, 2-year-old. It's over. Alright, so, playing field, the setting. Very important things. What if the 2-year-old is freaking ripped? Look, if you're losing against a 2-year-old, and it's to the death, that's on you. That's not my prerogative anymore. You're the one writing it. Tyler's got abs. Look, I'm tiny. I can take a 2-year-old. But this isn't about me and you. This is about our characters being able to take the 2-year-old. If the character can take the 2-year-old, great. If the character cannot take the 2-year-old, write that out. The reasons why this character cannot take a 2-year-old. Maybe the 2-year-old's an alien. I don't know. Alright, so playing field with settings. Is it a large, medium, or small space? So all these really, really, really count. Magnets. What do you mean magnets? Give them oh, I see. That's the non-fighty way, I suppose, giving them something to do. Anyway, so large, medium, and small spaces. All of these will have different factors of what you can do and what you can't do in them. If it's a large space, you can have larger things in it, like a cannon, a dragon, a big boat. And if we're not giving children things to eat that are not edible, okay? Stop it. Going back to fight scenes in the setting. So, with a medium field, you'll have, say, a building or a castle, or even like a town square. Those kinds of fields will give you a little more range to work with. You can have like a small little militia. A lot of Fire Emblem games have like these medium fields to give you space to have a bunch of characters in it versus another bunch of characters in them. And you'll have the room to use the pokey sticks and to smash people. And you can even add a little ballista in there because ballistas are fun. Who doesn't love a ballista? And then you have small spaces, which is, say, is in a room, a little cave, those types of places. And so that will have a severe effect on what can actually be used in there. So if you're in a tiny little cave, you can't use a big long sword very well because you can't swing it without hitting something or someone that you may not necessarily want to hit. Spears in that case would actually be useful because you can keep them pretty close to your body while also just prodding, and you can also create barriers and traps. While in a large space, it's a little harder to create barriers and traps because it's so large. You can't just barricade a group of people. You can lead them to a trap. That's against the Geneva Convention, but we don't care about the Geneva Convention here right now. Right now, we're talking about how to manipulate the playing field of a small, medium, and large spaces, and how those can affect how you write. Are there any hazards in these spaces? So is it like a volcano is erupting and there's some sort of lava field happening across the way? You can get pretty close to lava. I'm just gonna get that all right. So you can have fighting right next to some lava. It's not gonna be comfortable, but you can stand near lava pretty decently without burning. So, like, is there any, like, lava? Is there any water? Is there, like, other buildings in the way? Is there glass raining down? Is there another ship firing at another ship and creating a bunch of explosions? Those things are also going to affect your playing field and how your characters are going to react in said playing field and what could possibly go wrong or what could possibly go right for them. Talked about a little bit the advantages and the disadvantages. So, in a small space, obviously you're not going to have a lot of stuff happening, like not able to have a lot of stuff happening in there in terms of like mobility and flexibility and adaptation, while but you can set up traps and you can use objects around and stuff like that a lot easier because they'll be a lot closer and you can just use like walls and stuff like that to your advantage. However, the same can be said in a disadvantage where your character can also be used to break walls, which is up to you. How do you want to use that? And the exploitation of these areas are incredibly important. So if you have like a pool of lava, you can have one character just yeet another character into said lava. That's gonna hurt. They're not gonna get up from that if they're not like characterized towards being able to survive in lava. Like, that's gonna cause 3 degree burns. Oh, that took a while to get out. I'm having a stroke. So that's gonna take a bit. For them to, recover. And they're not gonna be able to recover fast enough before your character removes them from the game. Objects within the field's a little bit along with, like, the lava nearby. So you can have, as you can see in this little picture here, there's some rocks. You can use the rocks around. You got this tree. You can climb that tree. What is around? That's really important to kind of like use to your advantage, disadvantage. If you want to, if some character has like a ballista, you can have another character hide behind a wall or a tree and pray the ballista doesn't shoot through it. That sort of thing. They can hide. They can use the objects at their disposal. Is there a chair in this bar fight? You can use the chair like it's WWE and having a great time. You can also have characters have those disadvantages against them. So if it's in a bar fight, you can grab the enemy can grab a bottle and just smack you upside the head. That sort of thing is going to cause an effect on how you write your fight scenes, because logically, fight scenes are very reactive. And so if you see something that's there that you can use, you will automatically use it, and your characters are also going to react in a similar manner, unless they freeze. Freezing is a different aspect of how that works, but it also goes into the effect of how the objects play. So if there's a specific object that causes like a PTSD trigger or causes them to freeze because they freak out at seeing it, that's going to be an object within the field that's going to be a disadvantage against your character because they're panicked, they're freaking out, they're stunned, whatever it is, they're not moving and therefore they're not reacting, and therefore they're not going to have much of an advantage in that fight if they're not reacting to whatever is affecting them in that moment. Weapons, character interactions also too are a factor. So if a character goes down or an enemy goes down and there's another enemy nearby and the character just happens to be particularly strong, they can use that enemy as a weapon to smash the other dude with their friend. Also, the enemy using different objects can also affect how the playing field goes. So if you had a sword and they take that sword and now are using it against you, how is your character going to react to the enemy using the thing that you had because it was in the playing field? And then skills and magic, of course. So if there's a bunch of water, you can turn the water into ice, you can turn the water into steam, burn them inside out. Blood bending, for example, and from the last Avatar, or the last Airbender. Last Avatar. There's only one Avatar to time. Anyway, so magic and skill interactions are going to be the same as like weapons and objects. So if your character is skilled, they can climb a tree. If they're not skilled in climbing a tree, they can attempt to climb the tree, but they might fail and therefore hurt themselves on the way down. Environment changes. So there's changements through movement. So this is your character making a change in the environment. So there's a table, there's a bunch of chairs, there's bottles on the table. If the character flips the table, suddenly the chairs are all in a disarray. There's no bottles probably left because they're smashed on the floor, and the table is way the fuck over there, and it's not gonna work for whoever wanted to use that table and those bottles because they're not there anymore. You have more space to fight in now. So that's kind of like the environment change that you can implement. You can also use an implementation of the natural kind where it starts raining, so it makes things muddy, it makes things slippery, it makes things hard to see. If there's lightning, is it going to affect the arm and like whoever's fighting because they're wearing metal and they're in an open field and suddenly they're very, very, very electrocutable. It's probably not a word, but I don't care. So you have the changes through character movement, and you have the chair or whatever's happening. So if a train is moving, it's going through a tunnel, that's a change of movement as well. And then you have the changes naturally, which is like environments and weathers and whatnot. So if it starts snowing, then you're starting to get cold, and cold is not great for fighting. Welcome to Armies and Strategy. So I'm sure Coffee will probably make some nitpick notes on my stuff, but I will try to do my best. So armies have characters. You'll have specific characters. Not every person in the army is going to have a character like named to them. They may not have character traits, but they might. You might have a one-off little thing where this dude is just a dude, but he's got this little quirk where he's like, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna go see my dog after this. That is a character quirk, and it is super cute, and then you can rip it away. Don't rip the dog away from his master. That's mean. So strength and forces. So armies are gonna have a lot of different moving parts, so that means a lot of different forces are happening. You have your hi Phoenix. You have like your scouters, you have your rangers, like they're no Phoenix. Bye. Anyway, so you'll have people infantry, you'll have people doing ops, that sort of thing. So they'll have different things happening all at the same time, and also being aware of where you can have those forces take advantage of certain areas versus others. So you don't want to tank in the middle of the ocean. That's not going to work. But you might have a boat to take out a mountain. Anyway, thoughts and feelings. So different forces will have different weapons. So each army will have a different set of weapons, or they can even have stolen weapons, which could be very interesting in that sense, where you have somebody. Phoenix, you keep coming back, and I don't know what to tell you. You want attention and you want pets, but it's warm in here, and you can't just you don't wanna, because you don't like the warm. Not really. Anyway, as I was saying, weapons are really important. They'll have different effects of how the game goes. So if you have a bunch of Spartans making their way downtown, and you have a tank roll in, it's only going to take probably one blast from that tank to scare the crap out of those Spartans and break their lines. Skills are also a huge thing. So like the individual character, you can have skilled groups of people in your armies and strategies, which then you can play into making the impossible possible. So for example, there is a I want to say a civil war kind of thing, but it wasn't a civil war. It was more of a rebel thing in Croatia, and the United Nations needed Canada to go deal with it because they wouldn't take over the country like some other countries would. So they're just like, okay, well, Canada, you need to go deal with this. There's 2,900 of them. And Canada's just like, yeah, sure, we can deal with that. We're going to send like 600 people to 800 people to go deal with that. And they did it. They didn't have any casualties on Canada's side. They did it in like 3 days. There was no heavily wounded, and they took out the rebels in that area. So it was over a 3-to-1 ratio, and they absolutely stomped them due to the level of skill and precision of those attacks in order to control the situation and make it in their favor. And then terrain. Terrain is really important. I'm sure anybody who studied World War I and World War II will know that terrain can affect how you do things. Vimy Ridge, for example, is on a hill. Canada had to storm up a hill in order to take Vimy Ridge because it was blocking a front that the Allies needed to get into the Axis forces. And going into Russia, don't do that in winter, basically, because winter is really hard on resources, and it's hard on your soldiers, and it's just hard on supplies in general. And so terrain matters when you're doing a fight scene in that sort of thing. If you're having cliff sides on either end, how much room do you have for your soldiers? How much stuff can you bring or not bring? That sort of thing. And environment change. So, like, deserts can bring up sandstorms. Snowstorms can happen on a mountain. That sort of thing. So, just be aware of those as you're writing. Environment changes can cause massive changes to your fight. What do you want Modern Warfare? Like my howitzer? Howitzer? Is that how you pronounce it? Anyway, I drew that. It looks pretty cool. So, a lot of Modern Warfare is a lot less close combat, so you're not going to have swords and spears. You're going to have guns and missiles and rockets and satellite orbit cannons. And ships that go pew pew from all the way over there. So it's a lot less close combat than you will have in like your typical fantasy nature. Though you will still sometimes say like storming a fort or a building, there'll be a little bit of close combat in there. You try to avoid it as best as possible. Logistics are extremely important. It doesn't matter how many people you have, doesn't matter how good your guns are. If you don't have bullets to fire said guns, they're useless. If you do not have food, thanks Phoenix. If you do not have food, your armies will starve. Armies do not move on empty stomachs. Armies do not move when they're not paid. So make sure you have your logistics down, because if you don't have logistics, your army is going to fall apart. And that can play a massive role when you're writing. Say whoever's running the show is not giving their dues to their soldiers, the soldiers are going to turn. Because soldiers are people, and people like to eat. They like to drink. They do not like to be miserable. So that will cause things. Strategy of placement. So, as I said before, you don't want a tank in the middle of the ocean. It's not going to do well. It doesn't pew pew very well, and a submarine will take that thing out. A battleship will take that thing out. No issues. So making sure all your resources are placed where they can be, like where they should be, and if they're placed wrong or they're attacked from a different angle than the character was expecting or the enemy was expecting, that can have a massive effect on how you write that scene going. So if you have all your food and your health resources, I say health resources, your doctors and stuff or should be in the back line for them to be moved forward when needed. But if you have them in the front, then they're just gonna get gunned down and destroyed, and that's not great. So if you don't have the resources placed where they should be, or they get attacked, that can seriously affect how the fight goes. So that's weapons. You got your vehicles, as I mentioned, and terrain. Also, you don't want your important stuff, say under by a cliffside, which if a rain happens, it can cause a mudslide or a rain slide or a rock tumble. Just the rock to just break everything and crush everything underneath it. That sort of thing. You have offensive and defensive warfares. So you have like drones, and for more modernish, so you got like drones and counterintuitives, counter missiles, that sort of thing. You want those placed where they can counter objects being thrown at them versus having them in the front lines where they can just be easily destroyed because they're in the front lines and they're not supposed to be there. And then you have your specialized units, which I kind of talked about. So you have your Black Ops and your Marines and stuff like that. They go in and do specific tasks and then they leave. You don't want them sticking around, because if they're dead, then you lose your special resources and your special units, and you can't easily replace them, which is not good. But you can use that as an effective tactic to create tension. Say you have like the super specialized unit, they go in and they don't come back out. Your character can go, what happened to them? And then it kind of turns around and just you get stomped because everything just went wrong because you didn't plan for that. Well, your characters didn't. You did as the writer. So you got some tactics. Communication is the most important thing next to logistics for any sort of army. You need to be able to communicate what's happening where, and if you cannot, you will lose. So if your characters are behind enemy lines and they lose contact, they're stuck. They're going to have to either get out of there on their own, or a miracle is going to happen, or they're going to die. It's going to be one of three options. Supply lines are also used through communications, so if you need more weapons, you need more food, you need more gear, you need more people, being able to shift those supply lines and having them not be interrupted by the enemy are incredibly important. So having them protected is essential, because that is your logistics. That's your important stuff that makes things go burr. And so if the characters don't have the supply lines functioning for them, they're gonna run out of things really fast, and they can also do the opposite, where they go to affect the supply lines on the enemy team, where they can go and just screw up everything for them and then blitz them if they wanted to. Blitz is a fun word. It's when you attack things really, really fast without warning. So there's types of attack like blitzing, so you want to scout things out before you attack typically, because you don't want to go in blind, because that leads to traps and other sort of fun stuff. There's ambushing, which is basically blitzing, where you go in and take the enemy without them realizing that you're there, and it's typically very quick on how that goes. So that can happen in the reverse, where the enemy can ambush your characters, and it's typically quick because it catches you off guard, so they get an advantage roll of who attacks first. And so you never know what's gonna happen in that sort of situation, but typically the ambushers will come out on top if they can get a hold of the weapons and other sort of stuff that the characters don't have access to on, say, their downtime. Patrolling is important to avoid ambushing, and also promote the ability to create ambushes if they wanted to. Types of defenses, so you got weakness and entry. So if you have a fort or a building that you want to penetrate, you need to know what's the best option to get in there. It's better to, say, go through a door or a window than make your door or a window. If there's an entryway in the roof, you can go through the roof. If there's a subway line that's not used anymore, or a sewer line that goes right under the building, you can use that. Those things are really important to keep track of when you're writing these types of things. And you can also use them in the opposite, as I've said before, where you just twist it on their heads. It's like, we're safe here, and then it's like, nope, you're not. And then the floor collapses underneath you. Advantage roll? Yeah, so that's a D&D thing. So if you sneak up on somebody, you get an advantage roll, or it basically allows you to roll twice. Whatever the highest roll is, that's the roll you get. Trapping, you can set up traps, as I said before. That's against the Geneva Convention, which is a little annoying, but it's fine. Roll twice, take the highest. Yeah. So you can set up traps where you can make sure the enemy goes in a specific way, or the enemy can make your characters go in a very specific way, and then sets up like an ambush or destroys their supply lines or whatever. There's a lot of different factors that you can kind of roll in there. You can also do scouting for defensive measures, for getting, say, finding a place that's secure for you to chill for like the night or for a couple of days in order to recoup and heal and all that other stuff. What's the purpose? So there's many different types of purposes for fight scenes to happen, but you need a purpose. Like other sort of scenes and like books, you can't just have it there because it's cool or whatever. It needs to have a purpose. Like what's the reason why they're fighting? Is it for themselves? Is it for somebody else? Are they protecting someone? Are they protecting their people? Like, why are they fighting for any particular reason? Do they just want the money? It's okay to just fight because you want money. Is it for their world? Like, is it an alien invasion? Like, what's happening? If there's no purpose to your fight scene, then it kind of falls flat. It's basically kind of like a shoot-in love story, where it doesn't feel earned, it doesn't feel right because it doesn't fit the flow. And like you don't want that fight scene to just kind of sit there because it's not, because you want it, it's cool, but it's like that doesn't fit, and you don't want that because then it feels awkward and weird. Yes, How to Kill a Monster. I love this art piece. He's so cool. Also, you got the question of why couldn't it be a verbal fight? So why couldn't the discussions before a fight have happened at all? In the Art of War, I believe there's a line in there from Sun Tzu where it's like, most fights can not happen if you just talk. And you kind of want to avoid a fight to begin with at all. And if you go and do a fight, then you've kind of failed as a leader, or in any situation where you put people on the line at that point and you're wasting resources on a fight that you could have just talked about it. So that's a question that you probably want to think about as you do the fight scenes, and like think going, is there a way that this character might have just talked about it? Is there a way that these characters could have just not had the fight at all? Could they have avoided the fight to begin with? That sort of thing. Like, Arrow is a not fighter person. He can fight. He will fight, but he doesn't like the fight. So he'll try and talk his way out of things the best he can. If it's a monster, well, you're not gonna talk yourself out of a monster, and it is what it is. So fight scenes have emotional impact, such as what do they win, what do they lose, who does it affect, and the outcome. So all of these things are all factors when you're writing a fight scene, where they have things to lose, they have things to win. Sometimes they don't have anything to lose, and they have everything to win. And that emotional impact of winning is so important to them that it will completely change their life, which then can affect who else it affects. So say if they have like a sibling, if they win this specific fight, they get out of the hell that they're in and they can live a good life with their sister. Or if they lose everything. There's nothing else that's part of them if they lose. Like, they can lose their life, they can lose their entire nation, that sort of thing. And the outcome of that fight, win or lose, can seriously affect the characters. So if they get like severely wounded or something horrible happens in that fight, the outcome could be them having trauma later, physical or mental. And those are factors that you want to take into account when you go ahead and write the end, like the after effects. Because just because the fight is over doesn't mean the fight is over mentally. And the effects of the land that it does, like the damage it does to around them or to the people, doesn't stop necessarily. Welcome to immersion. So, does it make sense? Does Voldemort not being able to kill Harry when he's like a 1.5 make sense? No, it doesn't. Because you could literally just throw him out the window. He's like, oh no, the magic didn't work, it backfired, and just didn't throw him out the window. Like, just throw him out the window. So you want to make sure it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, how can you make it make sense? Is there something that you can add in there? Is there something that you can take away? Does that fight need to happen? And if it doesn't, maybe just remove it so the story can continue and make sense. How do the characters deal with it? Yes! The book's been out probably almost as long as I've been alive, okay? Actually, when did Harry Potter come out? Yes, now you've distracted me. When did it come out? 2001, so I was 6 at the time. Stop that. So how do the characters deal with what's happening around them? Like, are they reactive? Are they freezing? Are they adaptive? Are they totally fine with what's going on and in fact are actually pushing for more fighting? Like, what the characters are doing can cause an immersion, or they can break the immersion. So if a character that is typically very headstrong, suddenly not being very headstrong takes the immersion away. Like, why are they not going in there and smacking a bitch if that's what they do normally? Like, what's going on there? It wouldn't make sense if the character suddenly decided, oh, I can't smack them because I'm too good. They're just misunderstood. It's like, no, that character is gonna go smack that bitch. Doesn't matter how misunderstood they are. Is the outcome believable? So that brings up the question of whether a small child can win a big fight against, like, say, a minigun. it's unlikely, unless the little child is, like, some sort of, like, superhero or whatever. But, like, so you want to take that outcome and think, okay, did A plus B really equal C? Because if it doesn't equal C, then there's a small issue with your immersion. And if you're not entirely sure, you can always just get a beta reader and they'll let you know, because you, the author, have an author bias. And so you know what's going on, you want to know what, like, you know how it's going to go and how it affects different things. But the reader and beta reader don't know that, and that allows the beta reader to go, hey, there's something wrong here, you need to fix it. And that's okay, that happens. I've had that happen. And I write fight scenes all the time. I love fight scenes. But it still can happen. Even just small things, like, hey, there was a torch in this person's hand. Where did the torch go? That kind of thing. And why do readers care? Well, we like to be immersed. We don't want to be pulled out into reality. Reality sucks. And so if the immersion breaks, then the story flow breaks, and then suddenly they're back here and going, why the fuck did that happen? That makes no sense. And so it makes them question how the book goes and whether or not they should keep reading it or not. Do you expect your beta readers to potentially yell at you? Yes. Yes, I do. I do expect my beta readers to yell at me. Of course I do. That's exactly what I want. I want them to yell at me for such a stupid mistake. Mistakes happen, though. So there's a book from World of Warcraft. I can go on and on about that book. But the fight scenes in it do not make sense. I will go about cohesion and linear progression. Is it next? No, it's not. It's atmosphere. It's fine. We'll go into a little bit here. You want point A, point B is C, point D. You want that in a line. You want to know how you got from point A, point B to point C, point D. What is that book? Alright, it's called Shadows Rising by Madeline Bro. Terrible book. Oh, I got so mad. You can't tell what is happening until, like, the outcome's done. It's like, how did we get here? We were at point A. There might have been a knife someplace in there. And then suddenly everything is just fine. It's like, what happened? Your readers care because they care about the story. They care about the characters. They care about that world. And if you don't give them a reason to care, they will throw that book. I finished that book, by the way. I got really mad at that book, but I did finish it. Atmosphere. So, the narrator may not necessarily be the characters in this case, but I do happen to write limited third person and I write first person, so the narrator is incredibly important to how they interact with characters, both the villain and the team heroes. So them interacting with them, say how they sounds like some familiar author right now. I don't know what you're talking about. We'll come back to that question. That statement. My brain needs the train of thought. Okay, stop it. So how the characters interact and how the narrator interacts with the characters around will be telling of how that atmosphere changes. What's the next thing? Setting. Not important. Actually, you know, just throw all these. Go back. Leave them all up because I'm going to talk about a bunch of them. So, if the characters around the narrator are acting a little weird, or they're acting differently, that's going to change the atmosphere. If the character or the narrator is freaking out, and the other characters are taking notice of that, that's going to change the atmosphere of that fight. If the the narrator is more determined, or the narrator is very, needing to get something done, it's going to affect how the other characters react and how that atmosphere changes. The setting can also affect the atmosphere, such as a dark night. It can make it dark and spooky, and it can make the fight incredibly uncertain because it's dark. You're not going to be able to see things very well. And if the enemy can see in the dark really well, then that makes it extra scary if a character's running through a forest. It's not going to be good for that poor character. What are the stakes? The stakes can also make the atmosphere super tense, or it can make it super lax and fun and silly, and it can do all sorts of things. So if there's no stakes at hand, or the character's just like this puny little brat, thinks you can take me, and there's no chance that that puny brat's gonna win, it can make it a fun fight, where it's just the character can play with that enemy, or the other dude, and so it can make it lighthearted. But if you want a serious fight, and you want a serious tension, you can't have that dynamic as that fight, because it's just not going to go well. But if you have that dynamic and you flip it so that it's the puny dude taking on God, and everything's at stake, and God's just playing with them, the stakes of that atmosphere change drastically. Where it was once silly, it's now everything is lost. This is meaningless. But if I stop, then it actually becomes reality that everything was pointless. And so the position within the narrative is also incredibly important, where if you have a fight scene, say, like, immediately after a wedding, what caused that change? Like, it will change the atmosphere of the fight scene if the fight happens immediately after the wedding, because everybody's sloshed, and so it's like, why are you guys fighting? This is not the appropriate time. And so it just brings a downer to the mood. And if you don't want that downer to the mood, don't have a fight scene there. It's not needed. It comes off as weird. Exposition in fight scenes is very different from expositions in other scenes. So in fight scenes, they are concise, they're short, they're to the point. But they're important that they're there because it allows you to have the field setting and the objects within that setting to be presented as tools to be used in that story. So the characters, where they're at, where they, like, what they can visually see and where they're standing. If they're standing on the edge of the dock, like as the edge of this dock, versus standing or sitting in that chair, that bench, they're going to have two different ways of dealing with the situation that they're about to enter. Is there any strategy happening? If there is strategy, does the character know it? If they're just a little peon in a big war, they're not going to know what the strategy is, really, unless they've studied it. But if they're a general, they know what's happening, and therefore having that exposition of that strategy as it's either happening or they're before the fight as they organize armies and stuff like that, they're gonna know how things are playing and if things are going wrong. So they'll have that different tension of that ebb and flow of whether or not they know. And if they don't know, then they probably don't know anything going wrong, and then it's gonna be sudden and very quick on everything going wrong. The purpose of exposition is, as I said before, you need to have everything kind of lined up and make sense. And if something comes out of left field, why did it come out of left field? And you also want to make sure that your exposition isn't long and it's to the point and precise, because your character's not going to give a shit about something that's not important to what's happening in their fight. Say there's a teddy bear over in the corner. It's pink and fuzzy and makes you warm, and it makes the character feel like they're back at home. They're not going to care about that beautiful pink fuzzy plush in the middle of being stabbed. It's not a thing. They don't care. When they're dying, sure, but not in the middle of the fight scene. The emotional impact, so each movement of that fight scene can cause an emotional trigger, and it can either make or break the character fighting or the enemy fighting, and whether or not that creates the change. So if a character changes their posture in a fight, that's an emotional change of that exposition, and that's incredibly important to demonstrate in the writing, even if it's short, to show that something changed. And so it will lead into the next piece of that fight scene. Setting, so having the waters be calm, a glaring sun coming down, and some clouds in the way, that can affect how you fight, because the sun, if you're facing it, is going to blind you. If the clouds are covering it, then you can see better. If you're fighting away from the sun and and the enemy is facing towards the sun, your character that's facing away from the sun has an advantage of attacking that person that can't see straight. So having that exposition there for the setting is important. And then atmosphere, we talked about that. I'm going to take a drink. And then we're just going to look at this beautiful picture of this tunnel. Nice breath. So, before a fight, what's the character, narrator, normally? That's important to know. How do they act normally when they're just relaxing, when they're walking down this beautiful tunnel? Do they find it fascinating? Do they find it boring? Are they chill? Are they anxious? That sort of thing. However, that may change when they're in, like, a fight. So a lot of people will change when they're in a fight. They'll either get anxious, they'll run away. That fight or flight is incredibly important to how they react to a fight. And building up to that fight can also psych or encourage them to succeed in their goals. Whatever that goal may be. Is it to live? Is it to have fun? That sort of thing. What's the weight of the situation? Does that weight of the situation weigh them down? Or does it make them giddy in excitement to just get on with the fight? That can cause the character to either be over zealous about the situation. They could fail quickly because they're like, yeah, I got this, and then they don't got this. Or are they prepping themselves, thinking, meditating, getting ready to just be in the mindset of going into that fight? So when you have all that mindset ready to go, you want to limit the intake of the outside realm, because the character's not gonna care. They just won't. They won't care about random other things that are not important. They care about the things that are trying to kill them. They're trying to hurt them. That's a very normal thing for humans and other creatures to take. So if a character is irritated or an animal is irritated, they're going to be focusing on that irritation that's right in front of them, or attempting to find that thing that's irritating them, versus the color of the walls, the doors. That stuff's not important to survival. If there's a fire happening and it's sudden, they're going to take interest in that because it's sudden and right there, and they're not, like, it's very much a hazard that could possibly hurt them, or they can use to their advantage. Linear progression. So that's kind of what I was going on about earlier with that freaking book, is there's no linear progression. They have a start, they have an ending, but there's no middle. And it's really frustrating. And so you want to have that linear progression to let the character know, and the reader know, how we got from point A to point D. Because if you don't have those middle grounds, it comes to jarring, and you don't want jarring. You want it to be flowy and immersive, and for it to make sense as you walk your way through it. Because if you can't walk your way through the scene, then you don't have a fight scene properly done, and it's not good. You just don't want that. You want it to make flow. Unless the character is like coming in and out of consciousness and things are going awry, then that adds tension. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the linear flow of a typical fight scene. I stab this person, he parries, he stabs me, I back away, that sort of thing. You don't want it to be, I stab this person, and suddenly he's stabbing me, and there was no middle ground of how the character got out of your hit, first of all, and second of all, how they retaliated so quickly. So when you do the fight scenes, you kind of want to have points of progression, kind of like plotting, where you have how you start it, how you end it, and you kind of want like middle bits here and there, and then you want it to have it flow together. And it's okay to plot. Even if you don't plot, you might want to plot your fight scene just to make sure your characters kind of follow time and how they should be moving quickly. Yeah. Cohesion is kind of like this, kind of what I've been talking about entirely, is the exposition before a battle. Is going to be a little different from the exposition during the battle. And so you want to keep things short and concise within a battle, but you can elongate it before a battle. You want to have everything kind of like sitting on that reader's chest, of just like, if the scene is that kind of scene where it's just, you want to feel it, and if you don't, and if the character is like, doesn't care, they're having fun, then the weight of that's going to be a little different for the exposition versus the exposition in the battle where they're just going to be messing around. The setting, the characters, the linear progression, does it flow? So you want all of these things to make sense in order to create a cohesion, and you want to be consistent. Consistency is incredibly important. If you are not consistent, go fix it. You need to be consistent. You can break every rule ever as long as you are consistent with yourself. And if it doesn't flow, then go figure out where you kind of like missed the spot. Was there too much exposition in the battle? Was the setting not quite right? Were the characters acting out of character but not for any good reason? Was there jumps and jarring moments in your linear progression that didn't make sense? So those things you kind of just want to like work with them, get the flow going. You may not get it in the first try, probably won't get it in the second try. Have a beta reader look at it, kind of figure out where you need to go from there, and then you can go ahead and be like, oh, that's kind of like how that flows. And then as you get better at writing fight scenes, the cohesion will come pretty naturally. Structure. Keeping characters and narrator quirks. What's removed in battle, what is added within battle. So some characters will be pretty chill outside of battle, but when they're in battle, they could be an entirely different character. And if that's their character trait, that will seriously affect how the story kind of like plays out, where it'll take a different side of that character and show it, and then the other characters could then react to it and go, oh, I didn't know that. That's a little strange. And so that can create some narrative tension, or it can create some narrative relaxation where a character is like super timid normally, but if they're in battle, they're no longer timid and they will destroy anything in front of them, and then suddenly the threats in front of them are not as scary. Shorter sentences. You want to make sure sentences are shorter. However, you don't want them all to be short. You want some a little bit of long sentence in there to create some ebb and flow. Because if it's just short sentences, it comes off dry. If it's a long sentence, it drones on, and you don't want that. You want to have mostly short sentences with long sentences in between. Making sure the linear progression makes sense. So if the character is stabbing somebody and then they get stabbed in return, you don't want the person to be stabbing the person, like stabbing your character first, when the character should be stabbing first. If that makes sense. I think that made sense. Basically, you don't want things to go out of order. There we go. Keeping things cohesion, keeping the flow, allow exposition advisement. Follow exposition advisement. Yeah, that's just the exposition thing I was talking about earlier. So just kind of like keep the exposition to the fight scene limited, but like also concise to what the character is going to care about. How to best write it. So this is kind of like the thing that I typically do, is like all of what I do is that. So I'll have like the characters will check out the setting, they'll see what's around. But if it's sudden, then they're going to be hyper focused on what can hurt them, and also what can trigger certain emotions or memories or feelings. And if that goes poorly, then they're going to probably fight poorly. And if the situation is in their advantage, then they're going to probably fight swiftly and ending it quickly. So you don't want fight scenes to drone on forever. The fights are not long. They're never long. They're short. They're not Dragon Ball Z 6 episodes later. No, the sword fights are typically like one person stabs, they misses, they're probably getting stabbed. Game over. Fight's done. But like, you can extend that a little bit because you have like your parries and other sort of hits and misses and magic, and so those can last and make the fight scene a little longer. But you probably don't want the fight scene to go on any longer than 1 or 2 chapters. Keep it small, basically. You don't want it too long. Keep it small. Because people get tired. They're not going to be talking a lot either. So you don't want your characters to be talking a lot. Talking is energy. Talking is oxygen. Oxygen makes your muscles move. So if they're talking a lot, they're not going to have the energy to move and do the things that they need to do. They're not going to be able to focus. However, I have a character. His name is Azarius. He talks shit all fight. That's his quirk. He pisses people off so they fuck up. So you can have a character that does that, where they banter and bicker. Deadpool's another one of those characters, where they banter and bicker with the enemy to piss them off, and then not necessarily making it so that the fight lasts longer, but because they want them to screw up so they can just finish the fight immediately. And that's a decision that you can make with your characters if it's necessary, but you don't want all the characters to have that quirk, because it just doesn't make sense unless they're the band of witty banners and as your guild, and then have fun with that, I guess. But for the most part, you don't want that. You want your characters doing their back and forth. They're just like, yeah, but this is my superpower, and it's like, yeah, but this is my over superpower. I'm better than you, and like, no, don't write an anime fight scene. It's ridiculous. Don't do it. It's not incredibly realistic, and it does take out your immersion. You can have characters fighting verbally, but you don't want them to be fighting verbally the entire time unless it's their character quirk. That's the only exception. So, in summary, we've talked about the why, we talked about who is fighting, we talked about the character advantages and disadvantages, the weapons, boons, and banes, so skill, use, knowledgeable, that sort of thing. Advantages with the armor and their own abilities, the playing fields, objects within that field, environment changes, armies and strategies, modern warfare, tactics and logistics, purposes, emotional impact, immersion, atmosphere, exposition, before a fight, during a fight, linear progression, cohesion, structure, sentence composition, do's and don'ts. So, like I said, short sentences with a few long sentences. Don't keep them all short, don't keep them long. How to best write it. I told you how I did that. And yeah, any questions? I will sit here and wait and enjoy my tea. This tea is a little cold, but it feels nice on my brain. Also, too, if you have any questions, you can just ping me in the server or writing help or whatnot. I can gladly help. I also have a blog on writing fight scenes, and this will also go up on YouTube for any issues. Or you want to just look back on it and be like, oh, that's how that happened. Because that'll be there. What, if any, role do you think upbringing and culture should have on characters' fighting styles and or sensibilities? So, I have a character who, her name's Kiri. Her whole culture is based around fighting monsters. And so she gets super hyped up with the ability to fight monsters. And so that can easily bring into the culture of the idea of not wanting to talk away out of a fight, but rather encourage the fight. And basing around the upbringing of that culture, she's gonna go all in with fighting, and she'll probably, and she knows a lot more fighting physically because her culture is based around physical fighting, and tries to avoid magic because magic is for babies. Magic is for wimps. Magic's not good for physical fights. That's for cowards. So she doesn't really use it. She's learning it, but she does have the mentality of just not wanting to use it because it's a weakness. It's not honorable for people to use. So that will affect how a character's fighting style and how they react to certain things and whether or not they're good or bad in certain situations. What is something a writer can do to take the writer out of a story with action scenes? Not having cohesion and having things be extra jarring or things not making sense. Like, say a character is a sniper rifle and they're really far away from the fight in general, and they're kind of just seeing the character's a sniper rifle. Oh god. A character is a sniper with a sniper rifle. And if they're suddenly, being attacked by, way out of field of the range of, say, an MK, that's immersion breaking, because there's no way an MK can hit a sniper that is, a kilometer and a bit away. That's just not gonna happen. So that will take a reader out of a fight scene, or an action scene, because of the logic is not there. And you want to make sure things are logical. Logic is important. If it doesn't make sense, then it probably doesn't make sense to the reader either. And that will frustrate the reader. Like that book. Man, that book frustrates me. Oh, she didn't have a beta reader, and you could tell. Oh. Anyway, have beta readers. Beta readers will fix things. It's okay if you're wrong. It's not published. You're allowed to be wrong before it's published. And even when it's published, mistakes happen. I've got errors in my books for spelling. It's fine. What should someone do to help keep a reader from feeling like the character's overthinking everything in the middle of a fight? If that's a character quirk, it can actually make them be less, less aware of their surroundings, and it can seriously screw up, how they fight and get taken advantage of. But if the reader feels like the character is just thinking far too much, then there's too much exposition happening. The character shouldn't be thinking, monologuing as a fight's going on, because there's not enough time to monologue in one's head when they're being attacked. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. You can have a couple sentences here and there where the character's thinking about what the enemy is doing, how they're attacking, that sort of thing, like changes in dynamic or needing to adapt. That's totally fine. But you don't want paragraphs upon paragraphs of thoughts happening, either based around this fight scene or basing around the entire purpose of the enemy's actions. What exactly is that frustrated you from that book? Okay, so none of the characters acted like they should in that book. They acted all weird. They victimized characters that shouldn't have been victimized, even if they're my favorite character. I love Van Nguyen, but he screwed up. But he was still, victimized, which is not at all it should have happened. Characters acting out of either turn or, not in character, and the fight scenes in that book are horrendous. There's no flow, there's no cohesion, you don't know what's happening, you have to read it 5 or 6 times, you might figure it out, but a lot of times I couldn't figure it out. We were one place, and then suddenly we were another, and then there was people being stabbed, and there's other people not being stabbed, and suddenly they're being attacked, but there's no anything being attacked by, and I can go on a rant for that, but I'm not going to. Is there any other questions? No question is stupid. How much action is equivalent to too much action? Book equivalent to action movies? That depends on the reader, honestly. So, but I guess the best way of putting it is if there's too much action for even the people that enjoy action, it would be the Hobbit, the Battle of Five Armies. That is 45 minutes of pure action. That is exhausting. There shouldn't be that much action happening when characters need to either recoup, there's too much time being spent in this fight when that fight should have ended 6 hours ago, that sort of thing. So if there's not enough time for a character to recoup, and it's showing that the character has time to recoup, but like they definitely did not have that time, then that's an issue. There's too much fighting then at that point. If the book is about survival, then there's probably going to have different fights, but not all fights are going to be the same, and they're not all going to weigh the same. So fighting, say, a rabbit for food is not going to have the same amount of weight as like fighting a serial killer in those same woods. They're going to have two different weights of those fight scenes, and so it's going to weigh differently. Like, I love fight scenes, so I can probably read them all day, but I still found The Hobbit Battle of Five Armies exhausting. While Anthony, for example, finds fight scenes in general exhausting. So he finds my book a little more difficult to get through, even though he's my beta reader. Because it takes more out of him to read said fight scenes. So it's really based around your ability to portray how much time is passing, what those fights weigh, and how much your reader cares about fight scenes. Or yeah, is what Anthony says here. Depends on the fight scene, to be honest. The emotional impact of the fight scene, or where it lands in the story, and how much time there is between them. Yeah. So, that's Anthony's answer for that. He's more of an emotional character kind of guy versus a physical stabby kind of guy, which is fine. If we don't have the emotional weight in a fight too, there could be like issues with making the fight drone on, and you don't want that. Which is another issue that book had. There was no emotional weight. Okay. So, I will wait another minute or so if there's any more questions. If there's not, I think we're just about done. I think. This went on for about an hour and 35 minutes, so that's pretty good. When you mentioned the fight of five armies, do you mean the book or the movie? The movie. The movie. The movie is 45 minutes of fighting. I didn't read the Hobbit books, because I'm a plebeian. But, the movie. Like, I love action. It was exhausting. That fight should have ended forever ago. It should not have lasted that long, because the characters would get tired after a certain point. And if your characters get tired, then they stop fighting, typically, or they lose. One way or another, this fighting's gonna stop. So yeah, just be aware of that. The amount of time passing is incredibly important for a fight scene, because fighting is hard, fighting is exhausting. You need sleep, you need to eat, you need to drink. If you can't do those three things, you're not going to fight very well, and then you will lose. Anyway, so that's it for now. Thank you for watching. Entertaining the seminar, something like that. But yeah. Anyway. Hydrate. Ugh. You guys are coming in right at the end. Anyway, I'm gonna head out. Thank you for watching. I know I need to eat and drink, okay? But I'm not in a fight state. Haha, way to end it. Bye!